Good morning, esteemed colleagues, guests and adjudicators. Today, in my presentation, I'll be looking at the potential for video games and a secondary income source in order to, number one, decrease risk, number two, develop new target markets, and three, increase net revenues. More importantly, I will provide a new way of looking at video games, not only as entertainment, but as a gaming tool for the future. So to start off, I'd like to show a quick video delivered by David Perry in 2006 at a TED conference detailing the evolution of video games.
Throughout human history, people have played games. As man's intellect and technology have evolved, so too have the games he plays.
So, what are video games today? They are forms of interactive entertainment. They utilize our interaction in order to facilitate enjoyment. However, over the past 20 years, games have become geometrically more complicated, requiring increasing levels of concentration and input. They have evolved with our generation to more than just pure entertainment. Not only that, but the types of gaming have changed. There is now a new medium to suit every target market, at almost every time of the day. With devices like the iPhone, the Nintendo 3DS, and the Sony PlayStation. But in any case, I'll get back to that later. So the question is, what's the problem? Where's the risk? Daniel Cook stated the risks of video games development quite succinctly in 2006. He broke them down into three major areas. Financial risk, the big daddy, as it were. Video games development, like the development of many art forms, requires producing and delivering content with value to the customer. Customers are monetized and they get their game. If developers make a profit, they create extra content and add-ons, and they increase their revenues even further. But at the end of the day, no project can be greenlit without a chance of recouping the original investment. So the requirements risk. The requirements risk is basically, what the heck are we making? Games producers need to consider the customer and the consumer and create a game that will meet their needs. Requirements are typically broken down into three separate risks. The design risk. You need the best features for your game and relevant to your target market. Do you need to be high def, 3D, or do you have to have 7.1 surround sound? The scope risk. Finding the balance between the minimum content required and the consumer expectations. You have to create the perfect amount of game for your audience and save on economy. And finally, the market risk. Is the market going to change while you're developing the game? A full-scale video game can take up to 5 years to create. Of these three, design is the most fundamental, with the other two acting as constraints. In order to mitigate requirements risk, you must choose the minimal right features for your product. And finally, we get on to the execution risk. We need to know, how do we make this? Once you've decided what you need to do, you need to work out how to do it. You need to have the people. You need the people with the correct vision and skills, everyone from the creative team down to the testers. They need to know what you're aiming for. There's a technical risk. The risk that the technology will fail. They will suffer from Windows Vista, if you will, and all the products will not work as expected. There's a schedule risk. The games will be delayed and miss releases during highly competitive times like pre-Christmas. And finally, there's a quality risk, a risk of errors, a product that solves all other factors but includes bugs and other malfunctions. All businesses will have weaknesses and risks. It's the nature of business. Which brings me on to, how do video games make money? Now, there are a total of 29 revenue or business models adopted by the gaming industry. These were discerned by David Perry, who was a 27-year video game veteran. The color of the text here denotes the numbers of games which use the models. Green is a lot, red is a few, yellow is so-and-so. There are a couple companies that use it. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'm just going to mention a few. The first one, in-game advertising. These are obvious, branded images associated with the storyline or in the periphery. It's product placement, basically, and it's directly involved with video games. Now, Eva spoke a little bit about product placement this morning, so I'm not going to go into any more detail about it, but it is a very useful way for providing early capital to video games. It's about funding the game itself. Then we have around game advertising. This is banner or skyscraper ads like Facebook games have around the rim. Now, companies like Google and Commission Junction are the ones that actually organize these. So product placement has been known to work with video games. They take a lot of concentration, a lot of input, and we engage with them actively. However, research indicates that the key to product placement in video games is subtlety and relevance to the in-game medium. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show you that video games are more than just games to us. So let's take the subscription model. It's a model that relies on us selling a game and then selling a secondary subscription after that. If we consider the popular game World of Warcraft, then you can see people have to buy the original game, which is usually sold cheaper than ordinary games on the market. And then, after that, we have to subscribe to their online servers in order to play the game. Now, the problem with this is, with a game like World of Warcraft, it has huge popularity. It had direct preceding games, and it had a market base. But with other games, if you don't have the same amount of reputation, there are a lot of issues. If they don't sell the game, they can't sell the subscription, and they make an even larger loss on the entire profit, on the entire production. So, after considering how games companies make money, we need to consider which would be a more lucrative industry to look at. So the question is, do we look at apps or do we look at video games? This is a debate that's quite popular at the moment, and I'm going to go into some detail in order to shed some light. I'm looking at Apple as well, simply because they have better statistics available, and also because they're easier to access. So, first of all, gaming apps are video games. Angry Birds is a video game. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Apps are all cheaper to produce. Compared to full-on video games like Assassin's Creed or Final Fantasy, you're not going to spend £10 million plus. You're looking at a realistic budget of between £10,000 and £60,000. However, there are 640,000 apps in the App Store, and that was on the 12th of this month. The high number of apps means that you could easily have one of your apps buried right in the middle, without the correct marketing. To give you some perspective, since January 1st this year, there have been over 120,000 submissions of apps to the App Store, and only 10% of these apps have actually been accepted into active service. So basically, what I'm saying is, it's a highly competitive market. In order to produce a successful app, you need the perfect combination of marketing and development. What I have here is a graph just to further highlight my points of competitiveness. What you can see is the total. Total includes apps and games. Apps itself includes everything excluding games. So this is a graph depicting active apps on a month-to-month basis. First of all, what we have to consider is the total number of apps and how they're going up. There's a geometrically increasing pattern, which signifies that this is going to keep getting more and more competitive. Now, let's break down the apps by category. If we don't know what they're for, then we don't know how to analyze them. So, out of all the apps available, 17% of apps are games, which roughly is 109,000 titles. The second most represented sectors are 9% books, 9% entertainment, and education, which each represent about 58,000 apps. As you can see, there's a huge number of apps that you need to compete with. In addition, 47% of apps are free. If we take a look here at the application price distribution, this graph here depicts the price range for apps in the Apple Store. As you can see, the vast majority of apps cost between $0 and $6. Sorry, I couldn't get it in pounds. This means that in order to recoup development, you need to sell a substantial number of apps. And apps will take less time to create. It's a very good positive. Whereas some full console games can take up to 5 years to create, the typical app, as experts agree, can take anything between 2 to 6 months, so long as the idea is well conceived and it's a simple idea. And finally, you have potential for a massive marketing boost by Apple if featured. As you know, Apple features apps of the week, iPad app of the week, iPhone app of the week, and the newer noteworthy apps. So to demonstrate exactly how powerful a marketing boosters can be, I'm going to give you a quick case study. It was a game released in mid-2011 called Hardlines. It was first introduced as an app, and within the first 10 days, there were a total of 452 sales and grossed a total of $292. They had 14 reviews, all were good, and 22 5-star ratings, which you would assume would make it a good app. The sales started dropping after that point, consistently for a whole month, and then Apple decided to feature it on their new and noteworthy list. In 10 days after that, they received a total of 6,500 new downloads. They were then featured in a 5-day free app promotion, and had 82,000 downloads in the first day alone. So by Christmas 2011, including downloads from the free promotion, Hardline had a total of 258,000 downloads. So, on the whole, there's no correct answer to this argument. Both have their merits, and you can decide, depending on what you're doing and what you try to do with your app, exactly where you need to go. So you might now be asking yourself, why gaming? More importantly, why is the gaming industry important, and why would marketers care? So, for the first reason, gamification. And before I explain exactly what that is, I have a short video clip for you.
Introducing Nike Plus Training, your new personal trainer, ready to serve up inspiration every day from the world's best athletes. Built-in sensors in your Nike Plus training shoes capture your every move. Every shuffle, step, lunge, and jump. So your workout becomes a game you play with your friends and yourself, wherever you want, whenever you want. Welcome to Nike Plus Training.
So, what is gamification? Gamification is basically the application of game design thinking into a non-gaming application to make it more interesting, to make it more fun. So the example I've got here is the Miss Playboy app, a Facebook game, and whilst trying to encourage younger subscribers to join Playboy's Facebook group, they created the Miss Social promotion. This was an online Facebook game where entrants would submit photos of themselves and then network to get more points. The girls with the highest number of points at the end of the month, including votes, would win a monthly prize, which would be a photo spread in Playboy Online. And for the record, it's not necessarily a nude spread, it's just a spread. So since the introduction of the promotion, Playboy reported a readership increase of over 80,000 people, including a revenue increase of 20%. So back to it. Why is the gaming industry important? Gabe Zuckerman, a researcher in the field of gamification, suggests the creation of Generation G. Generation G is different from the typical Generation Y or the Millennials. Millennials are people like us, being born between 1980 and 2000. Now, Generation G refers to people whose primary form of entertainment while growing up has been video games. And there are a total of 126 million millennials in Generation G, excluding young children who are impossible to count at the moment. And that is a fantastic target market. Even further, according to Zuckerman, the effect of gamification is filtering down into businesses and the way we run them on a daily basis. Companies such as Playboy, Cave Crusader, Nike are gamifying traditionally to great success. Other companies adopting gamification include ABC, CBS, the BCS, NBC, the USA Network, and the Warner Bros. And finally, just as importantly, there is a lot of money in the gaming industry. For the past 2 decades, the world of video games has been one of the most stable, growing industries. According to the ESA, the Electronic Software Association, growth of the gaming industry between 2005 and 2009 was over 10%. So there's not only a lot of money to be made, but there are a lot of games being sold. The graph here depicts the revenue increase in the gaming industry in dollars. Whilst right at the end you can see there was a minor drop in profits, there is still an increase in the amount of games being sold. So, let's go on. Educational video games. Now I'm going to use this as an example for how you can use video games to shape our future. Edutainment. Edutainment is a term coined in the early 90s, which refers to a collection of video games that were educational in nature. Companies such as the Learning Company created these type of games. So, you may be wondering, yes, video games are educational. Using social concepts in simulated environments has been proven to be highly effective in education. Edutainment is already being adopted into schools in the US. And finally, there is a perceived age slot towards younger gamers. And there are very few negative connotations, so there's no reason it can't be taken to older ones. Which brings me on to edutainment for adolescents, finding your right target market. Meaningful play, which is what edutainment really is, has always been part of our education. As children, we gain a social understanding and skills using meaningful play. And research indicates that play has just as important role in adolescence. Games provide challenges, where the physical application of knowledge is the key to progressing. This differs from traditional educational models. And Tom Malone showed how games use challenge, fantasy, player control, and curiosity-invoking designs to create intrinsically motivating environments. More recently, Lloyd Reber has argued that digital games engage players in productive play, learning that occurs through building microworlds, manipulating simulations, and playing games. The challenge is to go beyond the Nintendo Game Boy, taking advantage of the proven positive effects of video games on attention, concentration, and self-regulation of students' learning processes, and assuring an appropriate transference by teachers. So, what do the teachers have to say? Obviously, we have to see both sides of the argument. So, in order to do this, I asked some of my old teachers, which isn't exactly a representative sample, but we should consider their answers anyway. There's always a new need to find a way to engage your class. Engaging children is the most important part of actually educating them. If they don't listen, they don't learn. Games for children have been very successful so far. If they were designed properly, there's no reason I wouldn't try adopting them. And finally, creativity and visualizing problems is always a challenge for classes. If my kids could interact and learn in a 3D world, that would be great. But edutainment doesn't actually stop at just kids. Edutainment for companies is suggested time and time again. Streamlining can be achieved by modeling businesses after games, by clarifying goals and improving feedback loops, like scoring in the game, like running through Pac-Man and finding the little points. Edery and Mollick suggest that designing games to highlight and educate employees in this manner can be highly beneficial. Increasing productivity through inspiration and motivation. There are several studies which indicate the positive correlation between motivation and productivity. Games have the potential for inspiration as well, as they provide risk-free environments for gamers to test theories in simulated environments. EVE Online is a fantastic opportunity. It's an online management game where players need to grow an economic empire, which can span the stars. Interesting. It's currently played and recommended by 80 Fortune 500 CEOs. And finally, user-generated innovation, such as Foldit. Foldit is a downloadable game where players need to form new proteins by combining amino acids to solve problems. It doesn't sound interesting, but what is the point? That is basically what microbiologists, scientists, and health researchers do. Foldit players can potentially find cures for HIV, AIDS, cancer, and even Alzheimer's disease, simply by playing a game and brute forcing it. But there will always be limits to what you can do. In this case, there's perception of gaming mediums. This is a list of the perceptions that people have, and these are the games that could be used for entertainment. In my opinion, it's partly due to the way edutainment has progressed up to date. It's largely PC-oriented, and more recently with developments like the Nintendo Wii, which has also released a series of educational games, like the one for marine biology, which they call Endless Ocean. While these are not necessarily rules, they are potential roadblocks that you need to consider. So what will make a successful edutainment game? The initial plan needs to be well thought out and conceived. For in more complicated sciences, such as medicine, you will need doctors to help create the plot and the story. The simulated environment needs to be as close to the actual environment as possible. Studies have shown that competitive gaming amongst friends actually drives up engagement and participation. The gamer needs the ability to evolve and change as the game grows and his or her knowledge grows. This increases playability and inherent game need is to progress. There needs to be a natural progression to the story of the game. So as the player's abilities increase, so do the tasks change. And finally, many gamers like a challenge, without which there's generally no point to gaming. Now who's going to be interested? Who are we going to sell this to? Educators who need to improve curriculum. Learners who wish to improve themselves in a safe and fun environment. Government. Michael Gove, the UK Secretary of Education, is currently trying to implement gaming in children's curriculum. The US Department of Defense developed a game called America's Army, which is an online war simulator. Rookie soldiers are told to play the game and experience realistic combat with realistic weapons. The game is, however, available to everyone. And as I pointed out earlier, there are corporations who can potentially learn a lot from video games, and there are several companies using gaming at the moment. So, my closing thoughts. We can design games for a purpose, for a specific technology, and have a definitive target market in mind, not to mention the increased potential. Games have evolved, and we need to consider their future as well as ours. And finally, we are in the early days of an extraordinary time. Games present opportunities to engage people in ways that no media before has ever made possible. Unlike books, games are interactive. Unlike movies, they demand cooperation and channel human effort. Games have, and can in the future, affect the way we purchase products, the way we work, and even the way we innovate. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Any questions? They can be about the hat, but hopefully about the presentation. Any questions? Thanks, Reece.
My question is, it's quite interesting that the government, both US and UK, are now endorsing video games when historically there were advocates against it because of violence and stuff like that. What's your opinion on that?
There are a lot of studies that show that there is potential for violence in video games. However, what these studies show is actually an implausible correlation. They test a range of genres on a range of different children from different backgrounds, and there's no way to actually identify it. The only thing that can be said is that violence does not promote violent games do not necessarily promote violence in children. But if your child is predisposed to violence, it will make them a better violent child.
James.
For the more educational game for younger kids, what measures are there to protect the child and make sure that what they're learning is of like higher quality?
Higher quality in what sense exactly?
And what they're learning is actually worth learning. If it's also in secondary schools, it's the national curriculum. How's that being implemented into?
Well, if we look at the US in particular, right, where education in the US actually started was with a guy named Anant Pai, and what he did is he actually looked at his child's school and he said the curriculum was not enough. He went and he studied BA in educational psychology and went on to do his master's in video game design. And he came back and actually created a curriculum for it, and that's actually been taken to many schools in the district and has been pushed across to many schools across the US now. So it's our responsibility to really make sure they go into the right place. At the moment, the majority of games are actually simple. Like if you look at the Nintendo Wii games, it's basically about getting a basic understanding of the whole. So if we're going forward, higher education, we need to actually focus, find the professionals who know what they're doing, and teach it like that.
Two more, Tom, and then there.
Do you think the rise in the amount of apps that are put forward to iTunes is due to the simplicity of creating them? Anybody can really create an app now, can't they? There's formats out there where you can just use a template and you whack in the content you want, really.
Yeah. Part of it is that, I mean, people think that automatically, if you enter the market, you can be an Angry Birds, and that's not necessarily the case. I mean, 120,000 apps since January 1st. That's 5 months. It's not a lot of time. And only 10% of them actually go through. So it actually takes a lot of planning to create a good app. So if you're trying to go into the market, you know, people need to consider that. Yes, partly it is that people think it's simplistic, but it's a false preconception.
Niall?
You sort of, this presentation was more about how to design your games with new business models in mind.
Yeah.
And not really the sort of the creative or the objective side. How do you think that is measurable, or what would you say to developers to be able to have the balance between the two, if that makes sense?
No, it doesn't. When you say what's the balance between education and...
Between creativity and financial.
And the learning, so actually creating a game that's fun and entertaining whilst having a secondary purpose.
Yeah.
Well, you need to consider first.
Thanks for pulling the question out of that, by the way.
You're welcome. You need to consider exactly what you're trying to aim for. I mean, our job is to actually find a way to monetize it, and monetizing it is creating a purpose in the game. But there's no reason that a game can't be educational and entertaining. I mean, EVE Online is a perfect example. You get to control the entire galactic empire of economy, and you can learn something from it. You can learn about trade agreements. You can learn about cooperation. You can learn about creating a corporation. You know, so there is a definite balance that needs to be preserved, but it really depends on the game and where you're trying to go with it.
And so last one, we've quite a few hands went up. Do you mind if I just take one more? Molly, go ahead.
Do you think that possibly the money isn't made from the apps itself, it's just made from the merchandise and what they do with it? So Angry Birds are teaming up with a massive film like Angry Birds 3 or whatever. I think that's obviously where the money's being made. Now you see loads of Rio birds everywhere in merchandise, and not actually that many people buying Angry Birds online now. So do you think that's possibly a way to make money out of the apps?
To tell the truth, Angry Birds is a freak of nature. There's no other app in the history of the App Store that's made it quite as phenomenally as that. So yes, merchandising is a part of it, and that's how you can monetize it, but to actually get a game to that level of success is the hard part.
Okay, thank you very much.